All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What an amazing crowd. So happy to have you all here today. Let me just get my notes going here. Okay, so you heard the names of the panel members here today, but let me share a little bit about their background so that you know the caliber of people that you're about to get some ideas from, okay? And they know firsthand the value of partnerships. So we are honored to introduce Maidi Hamilton. She's the CEO of Leadership Greater Chicago, board president of the Chicago Park District, and esteemed board member of this institution, MSI. She has a passion for education and community engagement, and she has made invaluable contributions and played a pivotal role in driving the museum's mission forward and enriching the lives of countless individuals. Welcome. Dr. Sherry Eagle is Executive Director of the Institute for Collaboration of Aurora University Emeritus. She's a visionary leader, and she has been an unwavering advocate for STEAM education and innovation in learning. Sherry's remarkable dedication has been prevalent over the course of her career. We're pleased to have Sherry with us today. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, and our next panelist is Markoya Fair. She's founder of Fair Share Career Services and Vice President of Membership for Chicago Chapter of National Association for African Americans in HR. Markoya has tremendous experience working across HR, including general HR, talent act, diversity and inclusion, training, and development. She's had numerous roles and stints in the tech industry, most recently at Uber. We're so happy to have your perspective, Markoya. And Yanni Mason is the CEO of Girls Inc. Chicago. She has 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, working in a variety of roles, including digital communications, social media, and a number of things. But most notably, she is a product of Chicago Public School, a proud product, okay? She has remained steadfast in her career and her commitment to providing opportunities that empower youth from Chicago's South Side. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
All right, so don't mistake the brevity of this panel for anything other than what could be fit into the agenda, right? It's a short panel, but this is really meant to spark ideas and spark these conversations that will continue throughout the summit and that will be synthesized as, refinements to SOA's strategic plan. So we want to make sure that you guys are, open-minded, listening, a lot of good information about partnerships, and I think we can just get right into it. All right. So Sherry, the first question is for you. Please share successful examples of new and innovative pathways toward a STEM career.
Thank you very much for having me here. I think after I have heard the dialogues already in the conversation that has been put forward about the work that needs to happen, the word system stands out to me. Probably not what I was going to actually say, but it stands out. And if we are going to create a system by which STEAM education can move forward, then we have to get rid of the ideology that a university, whether it's 2-year community college, 2-year, 4-year, it is something in addition to, as opposed to a part of, P-12 education. It has to be seamless, and the influence of professors and faculty from a university need to be as valued in understanding P-12 education as P-12 teachers need to help influence higher ed. And if that can't happen and that system can't be created and trust between the two, or we even look at them as two separate entities, then it probably won't take place. So you have to create this healthy system, and within that system is not just educators, but it's the nonprofit and corporate sector that have to be viable partners, and trust and understanding that they have a high stake because they need employment, and they need future employees, but they also have a high stake in understanding how to create programs that engage students in understanding why being an engineer and why going into health careers and why understanding that fields of technology have viability. And so we need to dispel the old ideology of business partners in our schools that support via money for fun fairs, et cetera, and they need to be able to help students understand what is their work, why is it important, what happens in my institution and my corporation, and how does this relate to the value within my community, and how do I fit, and what problems are there needing to be solved, and then so our programs can be restructured P20. I think that this concept of field trips, for example, to a museum or a zoo, needs to go far beyond just understanding the exhibits, but rather how are they constructed and what's their connection to the public good and how can I be a part of that? Because the system thinking that's been brought up today is going to be the critical piece for moving careers forward. You have to create the system by which equity, diversity, and STEAM education is understood that it can teach literacy, and that engineering is probably at the fulcrum of understanding being able to learn mathematics and science. My passion.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. I really love that you pulled on that systems thinking piece, right? Because it is a more newer concept, right? But if you think about any system, you have an input, you have an output, and then in between you have this black box, and something's going on in that black box. We are deciding what's happening in that black box and the value that's realized and extracted from that black box. So speaking of that, though, I want to ask Yanni, just in terms of access, until STEM fields are equitably accessible and the contributions of girls and women in this field are valued equitably, there will not be equity in the STEM system. Over the last 2 years, we've witnessed a number of partners, organizations committing, dollars and making all kind of commitments to close the gap, right, in equity in STEM, especially for marginalized youth and girls. What are your thoughts on institutions having made good on their promises to either initiate or bolster these commitments that they've made in this space?
Well, thank you so much, Candace, for that question. I'm so inspired by you, Dr. Shirley. I was really moved by your remarks, and I would love to say that things are vastly different from when you were a girl, but unfortunately, as we know, they aren't. So to answer your question quickly, they haven't. Right? End of story. No, but companies haven't, right? So in the aftermath, after George Floyd's murder, we saw all kinds of companies, like who remembers the black boxes on social media?
Yeah.
Everybody, right? You have the black boxes, and then you have these very eloquent statements on social media, on websites. Oh, we have a commitment to do X, Y, and Z, right? But if you ask the females in those companies, if you ask the people of color, if you look on Glassdoor, Indeed, or even talk to the ERGs, the employee resource groups, what these companies said versus what they do and how they make people feel is not compatible, right? So there's been a lot of platitudes, but very little action.
Yeah.
Put forth to advance this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for my organization, Girls Inc. of Chicago, we at the B, I know there's other organizations that at the B, and that's belonging. So we know that, Chevy Humphrey mentioned earlier how, 29% of the workforce, or the STEM workforce are females, right? 6% of those are women of color. Within the first 5 years of their careers, women who are in STEM leave their careers,
Yes.
right? Why is that? Because they don't feel that they belong. So you have all of these efforts to, we're gonna recruit from the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago, and we want brown people and people whose names are hard to pronounce. We want all of that. But once they get there, they don't feel that they belong. So we have to do something to make everybody, regardless of what you look like, who you love, what you believe, that you belong in the spaces.
Yes.
So, and if I can add one thing really quickly,
Please.
I know we're limited on time, but something Shirley said that really inspired me was that if we think about field trips, right? So for my organization, we serve girls primarily from the south side of Chicago. What we don't call them field trips, we call them exposure experiences.
Like it.
So also we're kind of fancy and extra too.
I like it.
But for us, we call it, so thank you, Shirley, because you reminded me of that. We call it an exposure experience. What's the difference? A field trip is a one-off. We're going to go to, Lincoln Park Zoo, and that's that. An exposure experience, we're providing girls especially an opportunity to meet professionals that they probably wouldn't have access to, learn about careers that they would have never considered, things that I've even never heard of, and providing that connection, because we know that for girls, period, especially girls of color, when they see it, they want to be it, and so we provide those opportunities to do that.
Yeah, and what a wonderful thing to do, right? Because it's about that consistency. Anybody can come into the Boeing company and say, oh, Candace is an engineer who's worked on all these advanced products and services, whatever. But getting them access to people like Sherry, getting them access to people like Dr. Shirley, who have made impacts, they influence policy, they run these kind of institutions, going beyond, is so important. And to see that consistently, oh my goodness, what an incredible opportunity for these girls. But speaking of opportunities for our girls, Marquella, what other opportunities are we missing to engage girls to understand what they can be and do and contribute to the STEM field?
Yeah, nice. So that's great. You said the exposure opportunities. That's basically what I was going to say, having exposure opportunities to introduce girls to opportunities that they may not know about, maybe attending boot camps or different organizations doing apprenticeships, things like that. So that's something that I think is very beneficial. In addition to that, I would say kind of starting early to figure out ways to help them build some of those, I call them critical skills, but they're known as soft skills. And those are ways to help them try to prepare for STEM opportunities. And some of those skills include analysis, includes critical thinking, problem solving, communication. And I think being able to help foster those, and it could be something simple as, doing Sudoku, playing chess, joining the debate club, joining a leadership position for an organization. Those are all ways to build up on those skills. And I think that's a great way to allow for girls to build those skills that they would need for a STEM role. In addition to that, I will also say the networking piece. Being involved with professional organizations, and that's also a great way to get mentorship. I think that's really important as well for young girls to kind of have that exposure to industries that they may not be aware of. And lastly, I would also like to say kind of having an understanding of what their skills, their strengths, and their interests are. Because, there are STEM fields, but also there are STEM industries that I like to emphasize as well. Of course, with the STEM fields, engineers, computer programmers, things of that nature, but there's also STEM industries, considering like a company like Uber or Google or Meta, we have a technical side and a non-technical side of our company. And granted, you're still in a STEM industry, even though you may not be on the technical side, it could be adjacent to, like for instance, being a technical recruiter. We still have to kind of understand some of the systems and things that they utilize for that, being a program or project manager within the tech industry or the STEM industry, or even doing tech sales or medical equipment sales. Like those are also industries to consider, if they're maybe not a numbers person or, maybe they're not into science, but maybe they like talking to people. They like still kind of understanding the STEM industry. So that's also something to consider as well to kind of gauge the interest of girls.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because that's important, because our children are not this monolithic. They have diverse ideas, they have diverse experiences, things that they are interested in, and we're talking about the fundamentals, science, technology, engineering, and math, and how they can apply it to anything. but that understanding and being able to apply it requires them having some insight into what the art of the possible is. So let's talk a little bit more about how those partnerships can uncover the art of the possible for these students. So my next question is for you, Maidi. There are many, we're sitting in this room talking about one, many national and technical affiliated organizations that have strategic objectives to increase the interest in and access to STEM fields. So tell us your thoughts on how can partnerships be restructured to meet the diverse needs and ensure diverse perspectives for these underrepresented organizations or groups in STEM and foster more equitable and inclusive outcomes.
Thank you for that. So I wanted to pick up on something that Sherry shared, and I think the emphasis of us being here is around collaboration. Yes. And not doing this work in isolation, right? A sense of connectedness. And I'm even going to go back a step further. I'm going to come back around to answer this question. But my younger sister, she's 6 years younger than me. We were raised by a 15-year-old teenage mom on the south side of Chicago. My sister is a physician. The starting point was not because we had doctors in our family. The starting point was early childhood, being exposed to quality instruction in math and in science. Going further, my sister asked for a science kit for every Christmas and I just told her, you're going to be a doctor, right? And she became an emergency medicine physician. And I may add, she attended Rice. You know, it goes back to what you said, Dr. Shirley. So I totally relate. Coming from south side of Chicago, having attended all black elementary and high school, as I did, going to Rice, which was maybe 3 to 4% minority, right? And then ended up on a full ride scholarship to medical school. And this was actually through the Navy because she refused to carry over debt. And so she's one of my heroes, but I'm sharing her story to say it started in education for her. That's one example. So now I want to connect it back to collaboration. And so how this is it's a multi, I would say, sector effect. So it started out in early childhood, then in high school, then in college, right? And then there's an element of exposure, and I really believe in this. Talent is ubiquitous, access is not.
Say it again.
That is the barrier that we have to break. I believe our children can be what they see, period. What they have access to, what they have exposure to. And in this is something that I believed in so much. When I was executive director, and Yanni and I worked together at Epic Academy, we had a career exposure program. And when I think about the STEM fields, right, and this covered a variation of fields, but every student in that high school, they touched a professional. They not only touched them, heard their story and their background, they visited the places where they worked. And guess what? We married those opportunities to internships. So again, being able to touch, feel, see, be inspired, and dream. And I believe I'm inspired here today by hearing Dr. Shirley and also our CEO of MSI.
Absolutely.
Right? Black female CEO of the Museum of Science and Industry. So this is the level of, I think, connectedness coming together across sectors, including, right, and in support of the education process for our young people, and then providing them with the necessary opportunities for exposure so that they can soar in any field, but especially in STEM.
what a wonderful response. And thank you for sharing your sister's story, right? Because we can't rely on serendipity to inspire our children and inspire the youth. This has to be an intentional thing. You know, and just real quickly, I remember my mom giving me a bus token and putting me on a 55th Street bus that stopped right here at MSI because this was my place of refuge. But I didn't go back and tell my friends what I saw here, what I was curious about, because I got made fun of, right? So I didn't have that to be reinforced. But I still got the exposure, right? And so if you think about our girls and experiences that they are having, Yanni, tell us, you know, for some girls, getting into STEM programs is a joy. But staying there takes courage, right? Because some of the experiences that they're still having. Tell us a little bit more about how our male allies can be, you know, courageous advocates for girls staying in STEM and also experience that equality and equity in STEM.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question, Candace. So I think part of it is the B that I focused on earlier in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so ensuring that women in STEM fields, no matter what they are, that they feel like they belong. Also, we know that according to the research, starting by age 6, girls believe that boys are the smarter gender. So girls start to internalize those negative, I know, right? No, just say no to that, right? It tears me up inside. So to have really what my organization and many others here in Chicago do is we start early. So really, I think thinking about the ecosystem that Shirley referenced earlier, starting in pre-K, right? Or even earlier than that, Maidi, you know, mentioned her sister being at a very young age. So helping foster that interest and cultivate that interest starting at a young age. And then also breaking those gender stereotypes, right? So thinking about having girls, regardless of how they look, where they live, you can be an engineer, or, you know, having them really negate those stereotypes that you don't look like an engineer.
Yes.
Well, tell me, what does an engineer look like, right? So having girls, you know, reframe that thinking. And then also in terms of something that I share with young people all the time, the former CEO of Xerox, she mentioned, I saw it on LinkedIn, I was like, oh, that's awesome. Really getting, so not only male allies using their voices to affect change, but also providing opportunities. So not just mentoring, oh, that's a nice young lady there, right? But also not only mentoring, but also being a sponsor. Yeah. So speaking the name of those young women in STEM when they're not in the room, helping advance them, right? And really removing those barriers that, whether it be related to childcare, or it be related to other things that women especially face in the workplace, really removing those barriers and being very thoughtful about that.
Yeah, and we can't count on what our students are seeing around them to inform how they should engage and how they should break those barriers and how to stand up for each other.
Absolutely.
Let me just do a quick time check because I don't see my time cue. I want to make sure I have time for a couple more questions. All right, we got 5 minutes, says Malik. All right, so Sherry, let me take it back to you because we need some policy, right? Because policy sometimes drives accountability. Policymakers play a significant role in shaping the landscape for STEM careers. What are your thoughts about some policies that can be, you know, implemented or improved to create a more conducive environment for STEM education, research, and workforce development?
So education, starting with the Department of Education, divides up our systems, if you will, as I said, into P12. And then sometimes the P12, in Illinois, we have 3 different kinds of systems. We have elementary, and then we have high school districts, and then we have unit districts. So we divide it up, and the university, community colleges and universities are in addition to. Matter of fact, you don't have to attend. It's not seamless. It's almost like you're given an entry and an invitation if you qualify to attend. And so what the policy shift has to be is, again, this idea that corporations, partners, viability of partnership, corporations, nonprofits, the cornerstones that build communities that used to be the seats of school boards. They're not always there anymore. they need to come together and form, not just advising, but be a part of this system that can educate our youth. The classroom teacher has far too much responsibility today to educate in STEM education, STEAM. They will never learn it all. But with partners, nonprofit, corporations, higher education, if they come together, they can and will make a difference. We had a project in Aurora that did this. There needs to be seamlessness, but it needs to start at a policy level. Not only in a local, and it can start at a local community level as from school boards, saying we're not just going to invite higher ed to the table, but we want them to become a part of. And in Illinois, we're very lucky to have many regional universities, state universities, community college systems that live right near our elementary and high schools, and yet many of them never visit. As a matter of fact, as I said, some of our elementary schools are failing, and I hate to say, they're not really, the children are never failing, but the schools on a standardized assessment are failing, and yet they're across the street from a institution in Illinois that is revered. That should never happen.
Yes.
Never happen.
Agreed.
Never.
Thank you. And just real quick, I have one last question that I'm going to ask both of you, Maidi and Marquia, to answer for me. How can policymakers collaborate with industry and academia to design skill development and training programs that align with the evolving and rapidly changing needs of STEM employers?
Yeah, so I think it takes a few things. You know, one of them is collaborating, having shared responsibilities with, policymakers, and then also the corporations kind of working together. And then another part of that is, maybe making policy to kind of understand or include actions for identifying like barriers to access, and introducing measures to kind of improve on some of those things as well. And explaining that information to companies and corporations. I know, there are some, tech companies that do have apprenticeship opportunities where they do allow for people who may not have a traditional background in certain fields to come in and basically teach them how to do certain things. Companies like, Accenture, Google, IBM, different companies like that. Even, Uber has had some apprenticeships or trainings of that sort. So I think being able to kind of collaborate, work together, share information, and understand how to improve on those things are very important when it comes to that work between policymakers and then also companies or corporations.
Thank you. Maidi, your thoughts?
So the only thing that I would add to that, just to build on it a bit, is the connectedness piece, right? The collaboration. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. And so that there has to be something that is cohesive, right, across the education system, the higher education system, and then also the corporate and the nonprofit sector, that we're bringing this together within the ecosystem and creating the necessary policies together. Also providing the necessary points of access and exposure together. Yes. And I think that that's how we begin to really move the needle. Okay. And there's a level of cohesion and also commitment across all of those sectors.
Thank you, Maidi. And thank you, panelists, so much for, it's like, one of those big lighters that you just flick, flick, flick to start the fire. Hopefully they have sparked ideas, and you all will engage and have these rich conversations in the breakout sessions. I thank Malika, Jessica, and the MSI for bringing this panel together to start this conversation. And I am looking forward to what we will accomplish throughout the rest of the day. Malik, should I turn it back over to you? Manny, there you are. Come on up. Thank you, ladies, so much.